Can't come down. And it's interesting what happens when we go into fear. What happens is as soon as you go into fear that you don't want to feel, Spirit straight away starts shutting everything down. And you could feel yesterday at the beginning how strongly you felt like, I don't really want to hear this conversation. How much most of you went away from the conversation emotionally. And that causes then the spirits to even, so there's in other words, there's a stepping away from yourself in that place. And that causes spirits to have more influence, and then you step away more, and then the spirits have more influence. And slowly it gets to the point where actually now I feel like, my throat's starting to hurt because really nobody wants to hear anything that's being said. Now, there's Europe, a Greek map of Europe that Nico brought today for us. And I want to start addressing some of these fears with you. Is that all right? Because the reality is that unless we deal with fear, we are going to be controlled by our fear for the rest of our existence. I don't just mean the rest of your life on earth. I mean the rest of your existence. Because as soon as you pass in the spirit world, you will have lost one fear, and that is probably the fear of death. But none of the other fears that you have will ever be dealt with still. So the reality is the faster and the more we can confront our fears and start to process them and deal with them, the better off our life is going to be while we're on earth. But it's also going to be much better when we arrive in the spirit world. You'll have far more ability to investigate truth when you arrive in the spirit world in a fearless state than if you arrive in the spirit world with all this fear still inside of us. So we want to start addressing fear in reality. Now, first, of course, is the fear of death. Now, many of us feel we don't have the fear of death, but I put to you that the majority of us do have a fear of death, particularly a painful death. Right? In particular, a painful death. So there is also a lot of fear about sexual matters, sexual fear. This is the fear of being raped, or the fear of being abused, or the fear of being harmed by aggressive and violent people, right? And for many women, they're afraid of being harmed by aggressive, violent men. And for many men, they're not very afraid of being sexually harmed by an aggressive or violent woman, because that's often not what happens, and the man is often strong enough to repel such a thing. So there's also that fear, and that fear is dominant in the female gender. There's also the fears of what will happen to my family. Many of you are more afraid of your families and what will happen to them than you are of yourself, even. So you're more afraid of your children being hurt than you are of you being hurt. You're more afraid of your children passing than you are of you passing. So we have a lot of investment, family investment in our children in particular, in their survival or in their happiness even. And the reason why we're often like that is because as parents we're often heavily invested in our children being happy because we see our happiness as their happiness as our happiness, basically. So there's huge investments there. Now, all of these investments affect how we see the earth change situation, you see, because the reality is many of us would be very interested in investigating fully with spirits and with other people and with scientists and everything else the truth about the earth and how it works and the changes that happen to it on a periodic basis. We'd be very interested in investigating all of those things if it weren't for the fears that we have about such things. Now, the main reason why truth is not easily available on the planet is because of our fear. Fear automatically rejects truth. This is a basic thing we need to understand about our fear. When we're in an emotional state of fear, we are automatically in the state also of rejecting truth. Now, for some of us, it's a fear of how we feel about ourselves. So we're automatically in a state of rejecting the truth about ourselves. Does that make sense? In other words, if we have a mirror there and we could see our spirit body in the mirror, we don't want to see. We go up there and we want to see this physical body, and even then half the time we don't want to see that, do we? We don't want to see what is happening to it because we're growing older and all sorts of things are happening to us. And so we don't even want to see the truth of what's happening to us physically, let alone what's happening to our spirit body as we make choices and decisions. And then we definitely don't want to see what's happening to the people around us as well, particularly if they're our children. A lot of times we have no desire to see the truth about their condition and what's happening to them. And as a result, with regard to the earth, we also have these strong feelings as we want to believe the earth is going to stay as it is, at least for all of my own existence. That's what we generally want to believe. We don't want to see major changes that have a huge impact on my life happening in my lifetime, unless those impacts are more comfort, more security, more safety, and all those kind of things. We don't really want to see them. And so we have this desire to avoid the truth of what is happening. And we become like an ostrich burying its head in the sand because it doesn't want to know what's going on around it. Right? And I think that's just a fable anyway, but I don't know if anybody's actually seen an ostrich with its head buried in the sand, but it's just a saying sort of thing. Now, let's look at what's happening politically in your region and economically in your region. But let's do it without the fear and just be honest about what's happening. Right? There's different countries through here in Europe, yes? How many of them are bankrupt? How many? Do you know which ones are bankrupt? Mike, you're involved with the... Well, let's go for what they're telling us first. Do you want to grab the mic from... if you could just take a mic up to Mike. And...
Hello.
Hello.
I guess
so in reality, which ones are bankrupt?
In reality, I mean, you've got... Obviously, Greece is in a lot of trouble at the moment.
Right, so Greece, yeah.
Staying near there, you've got Portugal.
Portugal.
Spain. As well. Ireland. So those are the sort of key.
Iceland, which is...
Up there. Yeah, so that's kind of what's more in the news.
Okay. Now, the ones that are not in the news, Mike, that you're aware of...
Well, I mean, I'd say that the UK was bankrupt.
Right.
I haven't looked into France, but...
Yep.
But pretty much, I mean...
So what about these countries through here, Croatia, Slovenia? Pretty much the same, yeah. So we've got huge numbers of countries now in the European Union on the verge of bankruptcy or bankrupt.
United States of America as well.
Of course, yeah. The biggest economy in the world is pretty much there, isn't it? Just hasn't been declared as such.
It's basically anything that keeps everything afloat is confidence, isn't it? Or belief in the press that things aren't that bad. If you actually look at the reality of it, by the way the economies are run, they're all bankrupt.
Exactly. So let's look at that as one thing for a start. How is it that all of us believe that we're all secure monetarily? Most of us do believe that, and yet most of the countries are in so much debt that if we were in that much debt, we'd be in a panic. So how did that happen? It happened because we do not want to see the truth. That's how it happens. We want to maintain confidence in a system that is proving that there is no confidence in it, and yet we want to maintain confidence. The irony is, while we maintain the confidence, it keeps it alive, but it's still going to get worse because it's still being run in exactly the same manner. Agreed? And yet we want to bury our head in the sand. How many of you feel safe when you have 100,000 euros in the bank? Would you feel safe then? Well, I wouldn't feel safe then, because the reality is that a lot of the economies here are bankrupt, and sooner or later it's going to have an effect at my bank. Why would you feel safe? And then you go, all right, I'll take my euros out of the bank and put it under my pillow, right? Well, the problem is with the type of things that happen during a collapse is we have huge inflation generally, and all of a sudden something that's 100,000 euros becomes 5,000 euros in terms of its value. So is that safe? Not really. So really we aren't safe financially, are we? Are we? No, we're not safe financially, right? Okay, how does that feel? Can you see most of us want to avoid the feeling of that? While we believe we've got the security, we want to avoid the feeling that we're not safe financially. And this is why the world isn't telling you, these leaders of these countries are not telling you the truth. The reality is you don't want to know the truth. Can you see? We don't want to know the truth. Collectively, we don't want to know the truth. Who of you have seen The Matrix? Yeah, a lot of you. You know that it's the red pill, blue pill thing. If you wanted to know the truth, no matter how bad it was, would you take the pill? You see, most of us don't. Most of us don't want to take the pill. Most of us don't want to see the truth no matter how bad it is. Mind you, I feel the truth is quite good, but the truth of the earth and the economic condition is not very good. Okay, let's look at the environmental position of the earth. Who of you have investigated much about the environmental position of the earth? A few of you? Any of you done that? Yeah. What do you find? Like, how much fish is used out of the sea? Do you have any idea? There's huge amounts, isn't there, of meat comes from the sea. Right? Do you know what they're having to do now to get that fish? Well, besides, they have to do fish farms, yep, and seed them and do all the stuff. Or they have big trawlers, 2 or 3 trawlers with a large net that goes for kilometres generally in between, and they drag the whole sea just to get a feed of fish. Right? And none of us really want to know, those people who eat the fish don't really want to know that that's what's happening. The fish stocks are being decimated in a lot of locations on the planet, yes? And we don't want to know because it's under the sea. But it's environmentally having some damage. What about how many of us are interested in what happens with our power generation? Well, we're interested from a consumer perspective, I'm sure, like I said yesterday, but how interested are we in terms of the damage that it does to the world? The coal, the search for coal, the search for uranium, even so-called green energy, such as wind and solar. What actually goes into producing these forms of energy is huge amounts of energy, right? And the reality is none of them are really sustainable. In fact, nuclear power is more sustainable than almost any other power at the moment, if you look at sustainability in terms of its impact on the environment, in terms of what gets taken from the environment. I'm not saying it's sustainable in terms of what goes back into the environment as its waste, but it's even more sustainable than many of the other forms of energy that we're using. We don't want to see the damage that's being done to our own air quality, the air we breathe. We don't want to see the damage to the water systems. And why do we need now water filtration plants? Because the natural filtration plants of the earth are becoming more and more polluted because of how we search for fuel. We don't want to see that. So what do? We bury our head in that as well. We don't look at that either. And I feel the earth change issues is just another one of those issues. We just don't want to see it. It's going to just leave it on.
Hello? Yes. I was just going to say another thing that that's been like a bit of a bugbear for me recently is I don't know if you get them in Greece, but like the chemical trails that get dropped off the planes.
They got, sorry?
Chemtrails.
Chemtrails, yeah.
It's basically, the government have said, there's been BBC documentaries about it. They're basically putting aluminium, bromide, all these sort of things into the atmosphere. One argument is sort of weather control, one's to stop global warming. And people sit there and everyone looks at it and complains, and there's all these clips on YouTube, but nobody does a thing about it. And you try and talk to people about it, and they're like, no, it's a vapor trail or something like that.
Yeah.
But they've put their hands up and said, we are trying to modify the climate. We're trying to modify your health through this. It's all documented.
Yeah.
And people just ignore it because they don't want it to be true.
Yeah. Yeah. What about what happens with the seed supply at the moment? How many of us don't want to know what's going on there? It's like, in some places of the world now, it's illegal to plant your own backyard garden. Can you believe that? that produces food. It's actually illegal in some parts of the world now to do that. Large companies, which are genetically modifying seed, want to make sure that they have control of the world seed supply. Yeah. So that's happening at the moment too. So can you see this earth change issue is really, in a way, almost a minor issue in comparison with all of the different things that are happening on the earth right at the moment that we're mostly burying our head in the sands about because we don't feel we can do anything about it personally. And so we bury our head in the sand, we just hope that it's all going to go away. In fact, we try to make out and live our life like it's not even really happening. That's what we try to do. Now, I suggest to you that exactly the same fear that drives that desire to get away from what's happening in the world right at the moment is exactly the same fear that is the cause of you not wanting to know what's going to happen to Europe in the coming years. Do you understand? It's exactly the same fear. The fear that drives the desire to keep your head in the sand about economy, your head in the sand about the environment, head in the sand about the political system, head in the sand about what's happening all through the energy system and the pharmaceutical system and every other system on this planet. All of those same feelings that you have of wanting to avoid what's really going on in all of those areas is the same reason why you want to avoid this one. And the irony is that this one, partially, is the result of our avoidance of all the other things. What's happening with this one is the result of our avoidance. So, what can we do about that? What do you feel we can do about that? Well, obviously, we've got to start feeling our fears. How do you start feeling your fears? You start by doing one thing. It's a real basic thing. You tell yourself and everyone else the truth. That's how you feel your fears. You know what we do? Most of the time we even avoid telling ourselves the truth. And that helps us skip over a lot of our fears, our personal fears and whatever. But more importantly, even when we do this, telling ourselves the truth, we generally skip over the and everyone else part. Right? So we're happy to tell ourselves the truth and change maybe a bit of our life, but we're not happy to tell other people the truth. Now, when you start telling other people the truth, sooner or later, if you do it from a place of love, sooner or later people will start listening to you. But what do they normally go through as a cycle when they listen? Well, they're not happy when you tell them the truth. So their first emotion is anger. And so this is why we're avoiding telling other people the truth, see? Because we want to avoid their anger. This is why most people don't want to know about earth changes, because anybody who starts talking about them generally is ridiculed, laughed at, and anybody, none of the scientific community, all of the scientific community basically have decried any earth change thing that's going on at the moment. They've basically dismissed all of it. There's plenty of evidence, if you look at the individual evidence in different systems on the planet, that things are happening, but everyone wants to avoid because nobody wants to tell everyone else the truth. Governments spend half their life not telling you the truth. Every government on the planet has secret archives, secret files. Almost all governments on the planet have secret police, even, with a whole heap of what we call, like what we often relate to as espionage type things, but they're all secret files, secrets that are kept from you, the public. Why do they do that? Because you don't want to know the truth. Because you'd be up in arms if you heard the truth. You see? And so we've got to start loving the truth rather than being up in arms every time we hear truth. Do you see that? If we love the truth, then the truth will come to us. If we love the truth, then we won't get up in arms about hearing this truth or that truth. We won't get all upset about hearing the truth. Does that make sense to everyone? If we love the truth, we'll automatically have a soul-based openness towards hearing it. When we have a soul-based openness towards hearing truth, that's when truth can enter us. Right? Now, I suggest to you that a soul-based openness towards earth changes is the only thing that's going to give you the truth about earth changes. Right? That's the only thing. And the reason why we don't want to know is because half the time we don't even want to tell ourselves what's going to go on. And then the other half of the time, we definitely don't want to tell anybody else what's going on. Because the people who tell other people generally get laughed at, ridiculed, or even worse. That's what normally happens. All right.